Greg Shanton, Vice President, Cybersecurity at Neovera. Doug Ichiuji, Senior Vice President, U.S. Bank. Johan Bloomhart, Virtual CTO, WatchGuard Technologies. Marv Langston, former Deputy DoD CIO and Navy CIO. And joining us virtually is John Piper, former Chairman of the White House Information Systems Security Advisory Group. Thank you.
Hey, great, thanks, Julia. So, we do have a handful of questions. I know that the panelists and I had all talked about or emailed each other previously, right? But before we get into any of those questions, just get the ball rolling on that if we need to. We'll look around and see anyone here have any questions so far today. Anything? Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I didn't see mentioned in the presentations before was anything relating to application whitelisting. And maybe perhaps not giving the users, or the majority of the users, local domain admin rights, which would prevent a lot of the loading up of any malware that gets put in there. I mean, there's no reason why the receptionist should be able to install anything on our computer.
Right, exactly. So the question is around application whitelisting, and then also on proper admin access to Windows domains or any other type of root access to any other different type of system. So that's good. So let's go ahead and talk about that for a little bit. Does any of the panelists want to take any of those items on? Johan or Doug?
Yeah.
Okay, Johan, here you go.
Yeah. Excellent point that you bring up. And running a network system in a school, we had probably about 5,000 computers. And, I guess I was more in the network hippie days. We actually had that security, and I would not recommend it for the record. We had locked everything down. We weren't running any antivirus on the desktops, only on the perimeter firewall, and we were fine. We had maybe 2 instances where a student or a teacher would bring in a virus. But again, for the record, I would not suggest not running desktop antivirus, but that's a very good idea to segment those network admin controls, absolutely.
I think a better question is, why would you let any employee run a fat client? Why wouldn't you just run virtual desktops and control them? In today's world, it's not hard. In today's world, it's silly to run fat clients, including Windows 10.
And just John from Skype remotely, any thoughts on that question?
Well, in a general sense, we found through risk assessments that system admins have a lot more authority than people think they have. Generally, they can do anything. And oftentimes, they're not vetted properly. Oftentimes, they're contractors who are working for a competitor company. We've had losses of R&D information. We've even had industrial espionage and all the rest from system administrators.
Yeah, so on the domain pieces, there are solutions out there today that help you with privileged user management, or PUPM, as some folks will call it in the identity access management world. And that is something that needs to be separated. It's something that, so the separation of duties, just like what's happened in the, if you go all the way back to missile silos, the 2-man system to launch a missile, minimum, right? And the same thing also with security in the cyberspace world as well. And this is nothing new, right? So this is, the government's done it for many years with the old trusted operating systems, if you will, Trusted SCO, Trusted Solaris, et cetera. A lot of those systems, now people have them commercially available that you can purchase for Windows or Unix to do privileged user management. But as a standard, it's definitely not good practice to have, like you said, like the receptionist to be able to load things up as an admin into a Windows file share, as an example, because if she does, or he does, get one of the cryptoviruses as an example, all of a sudden all those window file shares that person has access to are going to become encrypted very quickly unless you have all the controls in place. So, very good question. Thank you.
Comment about the administrators?
Absolutely.
So I didn't see it brought up in the portion that I watched earlier today, but one of the largest hacks that we've had in the United States history is the Office of Personnel Management, where all of the data for all of the clearances have been stolen. And so that's arguably everybody that had a clearance since about 2000, to include myself. So that information, every piece of information about my family is available to the people who hold that data. So how did they get the data? They got the data because they had Chinese employees for a company working through and having admin access. We just let them have it. That's why we have to take control of these things, and we have to use products that tie things down, like some of you're hearing about today, and others like HITRUST.
I would say just one other additional thought I had is that some of these exploits don't actually, when you talk about buffer overruns or some of the cross-site scripting, it doesn't need domain admin to run some of these APT style attacks. So that while that's a good practice in theory, a very good practice, it's not going to be a solve-all for some of these APTs that we're seeing out in the market.
Other questions from the audience? Yes, sir, in the back.
Can you discuss ad blocking either from a legal, ethical, or security practice, and if it's appropriate to do company-wide?
So like adware blocking and all the malware that's now, what's it called, malvertising?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, Johan, you want to talk about that one as well? And it's in your realm.
So I can't necessarily speak to the legal aspect of it, but absolutely we can block ads on the networks through app control. Because when you look at, I think it was ESPN a couple of years ago, absolutely they had, for instance, ads that were placed through the advertising network that had malware that used some of these buffer overruns. So absolutely, from a security standpoint, I would love to block all ads. I would also love to remove network users from my networks, but unfortunately that's not always appropriate. But I would say definitely consult your legal department on that, but from a technical standpoint, absolutely we can, and I would suggest doing it, but that your results may vary within your network.
Something that we haven't talked about yet today that I'd just like to put on the table for you is everything we're talking about trying to prevent cybersecurity has to do with building boundary conditions. It's sort of like the old build a wall around your city, build a lock at your door, and build a inner lock in your house, and prevent the bad guys from coming through those locks. And so we're just coming up with more and more sophisticated ways to prevent that situation from happening, to include the idea of training employees not to open phishing attacks. Well, stop and think about that for a minute. I would open a phishing attack if it looks good. So there's no guarantee that you can train people to stop phishing attacks. What we actually need to do is stop allowing malware to get a CPU instruction. So no malware can run if it can't get a CPU instruction. There are actually systems, new startup companies, that are turning this situation around, and they will not allow malware to have a CPU instruction. So it changes the whole game. You can leave all the doors and all the locks open. When you walk up to the CPU, you can't get an instruction if you're malware. That turns the game around. That's what we need to work on.
And John, any thoughts from yourself on that?
Well, to some degree, I mean, we see a lot of convergence going on out here that addresses the whole dynamic of the relationship of physical security, cybersecurity, and to some degree even safety into common security operations centers, into common response, into common incident reporting and escalation, all that stuff. A lot of this is derived from new guidelines from NERC and FERC, which derive most of their stuff from NRC. But the new NERC SIP 5 through 14 requirements, SIP stands for Critical Infrastructure Protection, requires the convergence of physical and technical security into common operations. And there's spillover in some companies with safety, because oftentimes a safety breach can be mislabeled as a near miss or an accident or something like that, when the fact of the matter is it could be an industrial security system sabotage. So convergence is coming at us from a lot of different perspectives. The NERC guidelines are extremely complex, and companies are having a lot of trouble with this. But at the end of the day, they've got to do it under the umbrella of $1 million a day fines if they don't.
Gotcha. Thanks, John. More questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
So just a question for the gentleman here at the end. If you don't think user training is important, how would you stop, for example, the kind of attacks where you see the email from the CEO saying, hey, I want all those twos, and somebody goes out and does the job and sends it off because they didn't think anymore about it other than just, this is what I'm going to do. No malware protection in the world that I'm aware of will probably prevent that kind of attack. And so my question is, if you start moving and you put all your systems in place and like you have your malware prevention, then they're going to move to other types of attacks, and like would seem to be user training would seem to be very important in trying to at least help prevent it and get people thinking about these types of things. So I'm kind of curious, how do you prevent those kinds of attacks? Just using technical perspective?
Sure, great question. And as the previous speaker mentioned, this is all about a combination of things, right? It's about cyber and physical and identity and on and on and on. So I would never advocate not training employees and getting as smart of employees as possible. I'm just saying you can't prevent employees from introducing malware into your system. So we have to have malware detection or malware prevention activities as a part of the system to go along with all these things. So it's a combination of things.
Hi, I'm going to kind of take this back a little to my level, because I'm not an IT person, I'm a banker, and kind of give you my perspective from the other side. Okay, so, we've heard about in the various presentations about the efforts we're doing in the physical and the virtual world, how the cyber, crimes are really impacting our businesses. And certainly from a bank perspective, we have tremendous things at stake here, because again, if we're stewards of the funds of our customers, and if something happens, if you look at 71% of all customers who say that if any kind of fraud happens within their banking, that they will leave the bank, number one. And so as a result, we've had to change the way we do business completely, from our retail, from our wholesale, consumer, et cetera. When, years ago, when this all started to percolate and really affect all of our businesses, we started hiring people. So we've got 400 people dedicated to this within the bank. Of our 60,000 employees, about 400 people strictly dedicated to this. Number one, we're spending 30% year-over-year investment in cybersecurity, because we know what it's going to cost or potentially cost us. If you look at the cost in 2014 of what people spent to mitigate, spent $77 billion worldwide. But as a result of cyber fraud and infiltration, it's cost $575 billion worldwide. And so we cannot take that risk. And I think what's happening now is we're going from more of a threat to a risk-based approach, because it's here, it's going to stay, and training helps. But for the most part, I think, why I'm here, I'm here because I support what these two companies are doing. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in what they did, because it's going to protect our livelihood. Certainly, reputational risk is very important to us, obviously, because once it happens, you can't fix it. You can't go back. So, from my perspective, I see the vast improvements on how we are paying attention to it. DoD was our customer, thank you. And we spent a lot of time with the federal government. But for the most part, again, we are focused on something as a bank. The Basel Committee overseas, who kind of regulates the kind of standardization of banking, et cetera. I mean, what they're doing is they are inhibiting us from changing our capital to make sure that we can account for cyber risk and cyber fraud. So those things are impacting our business. So anyway, I thought I'd kind of take it back to my level. Sorry for all you technology folks, but just kind of giving perspective from my side of the fence, so to speak. Sure.
I'm glad you brought all that up. It was mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned the SWIFT network being hacked recently. So for those of you who don't know what the SWIFT network is, I actually served on a review panel for that network 10 years ago to see what kind of vulnerabilities it had. The SWIFT network closes all the bank transactions globally. So at the time, 10 years ago, it was transferring $7 trillion a day. So I can't imagine when it transfers today, it's got to be a lot more than that. And so we were very concerned about that. The team I was on was very concerned about that network becoming hacked, because you're not talking about an inconvenience. You're talking about existential changes to the planet if they shut that network down for a few days. So simultaneously, if you go back to the DoD business where I'm always located, we started in a cyber war with the Chinese and the Russians in the late 90s. That has never let up. We're in cyber war. We have constant cyber war activities going on. If you notice the news, we just recently at the national level agreed with the Chinese that we're going to quit stealing IP from each other. Yeah, well, hopefully that's going to happen. If you look at what has happened in the Chinese world, where they've taken IP, intellectual property, from our companies over the last decade plus, it's argued that the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the globe has taken place because of that cyber IP transfer. So let me give you an example of that. The company called Cisco that builds routers and switches, the company called Motorola that builds a lot of our electronics, their IP was hacked by a company called Huawei in China. Today, Huawei has 65,000 engineers. They're the #1 provider of fiber optics and 5th generation and 4th generation cellular tower systems. And we in the United States are no longer in the telco business. We have no telco business. So we think we're a high-tech company, but we gave our business to the Huawei. And if you look now, the best phone on the market is a Huawei phone. So Huawei is going to be in your future. It's going to be a common name. You're going to see it every day. It started by cyber hacking. These are the things that are at stake with this stuff. This is very serious to our existential future in the country.
And, this morning, the SEC chairman just mentioned that cyber crimes, or, the cyber theft, cyber security is the #1 priority. And that's the biggest issue she's got right now. She said that could impact the financial systems.
Yes, sir.
So another question related to banking, and the question I wanted to ask is, for, 6 or 7 years now, Brazil has been giving its customers two-factor authentication to the customer. So if you want to do online banking, you use your little key. In the presentations before also, I didn't see a lot mentioned on two-factor, and it's certainly it seems to be a good way of protecting a lot of things, and certainly raising the bar significantly today at a relatively low cost. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would let these three other gentlemen from the technology perspective address your question. But from the bank perspective, I mean, we're concerned. I think you heard an example this morning. People are going through the VPN. So people work remotely. These cyber hackers are getting through the VPN and pretending like they're the CEO, saying that, hey, this is Joe Blow, and, customers all angry about not getting their wire transfer, such wire transfer $21 million or something like that. It's happened. I heard about it. One of our cybersecurity persons briefed me on it a couple weeks ago, saying it happened to someone she heard out, and I'm like, that's unbelievable. That's what's happening. So as far as how do you mitigate that, I mean, I can tell you that we are so password protected, and all these, first, second, third, fourth line of defense within our bank. It's almost a nausea, but it's good. Just a little, promotion for the bank, but we've been consistent for the last 10 years, voted the most secure bank in America, and the most trusted bank, et cetera, et cetera. So we've put a lot, like I told you, we've invested, 400 people into this business to make sure that, our customers are safe, the money that we guard for our customers are good. But, from a technology perspective, I wish I could answer that. I can't, so I'm going to let these three gentlemen do that.
Well, you raise a very great point, and try fitting everything in 20 minutes, right? But absolutely, I would strongly suggest rolling out two-factor authentication. You can do that with SMS. And absolutely, as I briefly showed on there, Secure ID is one of the vendors that we work with, have a technology partnership with. So when you look at that, absolutely it raises the bar. However, it still doesn't, as I explained, you can still get past the two-factor authentication. However, just the fact that it raises the bar, I think more companies should be employing it. And certainly I've had more conversations in the last year about how to implement two-factor authentication, which is a very good sign. So absolutely, I would put that on the radar, or on the to-do list, rather.
Let me just add to that. It was a great point. For those of you who don't know it personally, everybody who has a Gmail account can have two-factor authentication, which comes back through your SMS. They text you and give you 6 digits, you put it in, and you can log into your system. I would recommend everybody do that and have all your children do it. And if you go to your financial accounts, I went to my financial accounts and asked them to give me two-factor because it wasn't offered on the website. they'll say, okay, I'll give you two-factor, and they try to turn it on, but oftentimes it's not easy to find out you can get two-factor, so it's worth looking at. And there's a third kind of two-factor that we need on our financial accounts, and that's a verbal password. Because people can call into your account, particularly if they get a hold of your Social Security number, like people that are in the OPM hack, and they can play like they're you, and if there isn't a verbal password on there that helps prevent them from getting through into your account, then they can take over your account, and that happens all the time. So everywhere we can turn on two-factor, particularly something simple like SMS, is a great idea.
And just like all the other speakers said, so two-factor authentication has been around for a while, and unfortunately, not a lot of companies actually do it. I remember working on a project back in 1994, and that technology still has not come out yet for multi-factor authentication. And hopefully one day will in the banking industry come out specifically, right? So I know like today, for instance, something related, how many of y'all actually have gotten a whole new issue of smart cards, your credit cards, right? Got those? And then we all have to get the new POS systems, right? Okay, they're going along with that. So that's good. And you start getting the upgrade there from the smart card pieces, right? There's also technology where the biometric, a fingerprint, can actually work right on the credit card. 1994 DoD project that I was working on specifically, right? So it's there. It has not been rolled out yet. That's a long time ago, obviously. So the easy way to do two-factor authentication today is actually with a hardware token. There are certain banks today that will do one that's the size of your credit card. That you push a little button there and it gives you your 6-digit PIN, OTP or one-time password, plus also, your user ID, plus also the user password. So that's something that I do personally. Everyone I bank with, everyone that I actually do my retirement with, if they don't have it, I won't bank online with them. That's just me because I just know better, right? But that's something that can be done by not just banks, but also by anyone that takes a transaction. It's not that difficult to do it. And then you go, yes, you can do the SMS like that Marv was saying down in the corner, right? The only issue I have with that, right? You get the SMS here. If someone steals my iPhone now, now you have it where it pops up and you can get that ID. So it's better. This is better, right? On the phone, it's more convenient and it's much better to have it, at least get the SMS here, as Marv was saying, than it is to not do anything at all, right? It's a lot better. But to go even one step further is to actually have either the key fob that you see that you put on your keys, or the one that's the size of your credit card that sticks right in your wallet and you just pull it out just like one of your other credit cards.
I can speak to the chip card.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can speak to the chip card. At least I can speak to something with technology-wise. The EMV, it's called EMV. It's Euro MasterCard Visa. That's what EMV stands for. It's basically a chip card that all credit card issuers have embedded on a card itself. So what that did was it requires either a PIN or a signature on the transaction. And the motivation by the merchants, because the fraud's so rampant, right, where, I mean, everybody's had compromise in their credit card, right? So what they do is they've shifted the liability to the merchant. So as of October last year, if you did not have an EMV card reader from a merchant processor, in other words, a company that processes your credit card, then if there's fraud on that card, the merchant's liable for that fraud, because generally the banks eat it. So again, it's really great. It's really made tremendous steps toward the card when it's presented at a point of sale.
It doesn't do anything for the online stuff.
Exactly. That's where the other next step I guess would be. But for the most part, yeah, it has mitigated a lot of that card present kind of transaction. It's very expensive, by the way. It's very expensive.
It is.
That we basically had to build into our cost of doing business.
Like Doug, has anyone at the bank talked about actually using the biometric reader on the smart card itself, on the chip card? Have you even heard about that?
Well, I think it's getting there.
Right.
That, I would say this also, that, our bank is conservative as we are. We are one of the leading payment providers with Apple Pay. We're one of the very first banks to use our cards on Apple Pay. So our Chief Innovation Officer basically has, providing the biometric on using your iPhone, for example, to authenticate you as you make a purchase, et cetera. I don't know about the the eye scan, stuff like that, but for the most part, yeah, the finger biometrics working well.
And love Apple Pay. And so I'm glad you guys are backing that. So that's good. Want to transaction-wise. John, any thoughts on multi-factor authentication before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, particularly when it comes to industrial control systems. These system administrators in industrial control systems, they're usually high-end engineering and maintenance people, have enormous authority in those systems. And I won't say they can destroy the systems, but I can say definitively they can seriously disrupt those systems in power plants and manufacturing plants. So we've been recommending two-factor authentication for those high-level system management folks. There's also some issues around dialing in to industrial control systems and the need for two-factor authentication there. Some of these high-level engineers can wake up in the middle of the night and solve a problem halfway around the world from the telephone on their bedroom nightstand. And there's a lot of authentication that should be applied to that scenario. And there's also issues when the industrial control systems link to the business process systems like SAP. And, can somebody traverse SAP and get into industrial control? Generally, we go by NIST 882, which is the sort of the gold standard for industrial control system security. But I won't say that there are many folks out there in the industrial world that are using that as a guideline.
And John, just on industrial controls, can you give a few more examples of equipment as well as like types of companies that would be using those industrial controls?
Well, there's a lot of companies that are in that business, like Allen Bradley and Siemens and others. Yeah, in most of your manufacturing plants, your process logic control units and human machine interface units and all the rest are part of a big base of industrial control system companies and applications. Again, more and more convergence going on between IT systems and industrial control. And the best practice out there per NIST is a one-way gate where the industrial control system data would be communicated to the IT system because they have to, order inventory supplies and things like that based on industrial output. But when you have a two-way street, the IT system can contaminate the industrial control system. And we had a case just recently in that where a contractor came in with a very nice PowerPoint presentation. The employee asked the contractor if he could get a copy of it. The contractor then inserts a USB into the employee's IT laptop that was contaminated by a worm. It beat the firewall. It traversed the IT system and then jumped into the industrial control system and took down 3 production lines and cost $1 million. So, the process from industrial control system should be one way to IT and not the inverse.
Yep, makes total sense. Gentleman in the back.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about encryption, and it was mentioned, I think, in both presentations this morning about utilizing encryption to encrypt your communication with online sites, Facebook, YouTube, etc. There's also a lot of topics in discussion about should there be a weakness put into those levels of communication and encryption so that our government and our companies can, help protect us from terrorism and a lot of other things, right? So could you guys talk to whether you agree, disagree, pluses, minuses, etc.?
All right, so my background is in cryptography. So I started in security back in the early 90s. I've got some interesting thoughts on that, but I can tell you that encryption used to be treated as a munition, a weapon, because it is, and a lot of people forgot about that because it was meant for good, but it can also be used for evil, like we're seeing today with all the ransomware pieces. I happen to be at a startup company doing crypto a long time ago that certain government agencies would go behind us and say, it's not allowed to be exported, right? Because it was very strong, very high grade, what they call symmetric key cryptography as well. It was very hard to break. Everything's breakable, by the way. There's nothing that's unbreakable. But I've got my own personal thoughts. I'll let the other gentleman talk about theirs, but, encryption, for a business, right? The business, and the employees, right? The employees are doing business. It's the business there that, you're conducting business, you're an employee. My thoughts on that is that the business needs to be able to decrypt and protect the business, right? And employees, if they happen to be doing personal information there, checking the personal email accounts, et cetera, my personal opinion is that it needs to be decrypted so you're protecting the business, right?
Great question. So, our most trusted agency, NSA, brought us Snowden, and Snowden has released a lot of information that are our most trusted secrets. So it's pretty clear that the government can't always protect itself for whatever reason, because of the complexity of large workforces, et cetera. There's another thing going on, which is the rapid rise of information technology forward motion. The government used to be in front of it. It's not in front of it now. So I think even if the Apple-Google issue over encryption were to go in favor of the government, it wouldn't be very many years or months before encryption would come out that would be better than the government could keep up with anyway. So I think that Apple and Google are right. I think we should not try to put backdoors in the encryption, because we will probably have a heck of a time protecting those backdoors, and it's going to bypass everybody anyway. So ultimately, encryption is going to be so hard that everybody's going to be encrypting everything, and it's going to be a hard thing to break into.
John, any thoughts from your side?
Well, just that encryption mitigates the threat from the corrupt system administrator, puts them out of business.
There's also, I know when we do a raffle on one of the books, there's the At War book. There's actually a chapter in there that discusses some of this, which I actually didn't know was public information yet, about specific companies that built backdoors into their, well, I'm not going to mention the names, being videotaped, but specific public companies that we all know that had backdoors, and they've been published, that they did that for the government, right? And also, the government does evaluate various products to look at different flaws, and they may not let folks know about those flaws, including those companies. So anyway, but the At War book, it's a very good book by Shane Harris that I found very interesting. And again, some of the stuff in there which I didn't know was public yet is published in now books that everyone can read, and specific company names that you'll definitely know, their household names. All right, next question from the audience. Yes, sir.
I would like the panel to give us some feedback on what you see. You mentioned it twice. You mentioned a little bit during your presentation on getting a resume over email, opening it, but I want to go a step further. How about printing it on different devices, enterprise devices? You talk about embedded devices. I would like to know what the government, from the government perspective, where are we handling that? You talked about Snowden, but at the end of the day, if you think about everything that has an embedded device, where are we in reference to those types of protections? You have a perimeter that's also in China.
So looking at like documents or objects that we get in, whether via Word document or PowerPoint, right? Exactly, and it can be sent to like that projector, right? Or it can be sent to the iPhone, or it can be sent to anything's got an IP address,
right?
Right, and so then you want to know what our thoughts on about specifically around protection of those devices.
Where are we from an industry perspective? Because as you said, government's really behind. They no longer do any research like we did back in the 60s. That's why our customer base is over in China for the iPhones and so forth. So where are we from an industry perspective in reference to looking at these type of embedded devices, sensors, from a protection perspective?
Absolutely, and you raise a very great point. I can't speak to what the government's doing, but I can speak to what we're doing and what we've actually seen out there. So you touch on this idea of the Internet of Things coming out with smart things in the home, having vulnerabilities, et cetera. In one of my presentations, I actually have, where we now have the smart refrigerator that has, here's the ingredients you have, the recipes you can make, et cetera. And the first documented case was in 2014, where it actually sent out 750,000 spam emails. So when you look at security from any perspective, it should be that you're doing a perimeter defense on there. Especially when you have, at our trade show giveaways, we have little webcam covers because they're hacked, and people still don't realize that people can hack webcams, see what you're doing, and you know, a piece of tape is a great way to solve it. But when you look at some of these concerns out there that we have, there was the airliner, there was a hack in the airliner. Last I read, that was yet to be seen whether or not that was actually validated. But absolutely, we need to have controls on all these instances that we have. And a lot of times, you know, we'll go in, do a network assessment, and people say, oh, that's just the HP jet driver, right? Well, it's known to be chatty. Well, what is it actually doing on the network? And a lot of times, we're seeing more recently where it's trying to cross-contaminate. Part of the kill chain is, you know, moving within an organization where you take in one, for instance, it was brought up over the jump drive installed, now it's on the ICS system. So absolutely, perimeter defense as well as network segmentation, and having that from a security standpoint, that's my recommendation.
I'll just add to it quickly that obviously we all know about HIPAA law, which says we can't share our health information easily, and they try to tie it down because it's a law, and that's a good thing. The government, inside the government, doesn't allow people to pass around personal information without it being properly passed around. But all those things are largely personnel training with a little bit of controls around them, and so they're hard to implement or hard to enforce, and it's going to continue to be a problem in one form or another as we continue to go down these paths. It's not easily solved.
Specific. Somebody just the manufacturer probably has no security under any of their devices that's in there that can be penetrated.
Mm-hmm.
What do we? Somebody created something. You said you have a bank. You buy equipment. Does the manufacturer protect the equipment that you're going to have? That has a
firmware, right?
Yeah.
That is true. I mean, that's true today, right? In the future, we're going to be there. It's going to happen, right? We get the compartments. Yeah, absolutely.
So coming from my, you know, again, very elementary approach to this, you know, if they provided that kind of protection on, let's say, Apple computers, if Apple provided that for everybody, then if something's compromised on Apple, then everybody gets affected, right? So that's why I presume that within the bank, what we do is when we buy a product like that, like our laptops, for example, then we would install all that kind of, you know, security software that you know, hopefully would mitigate all this malware stuff. But good. I'd like to pose a question, if I could. You know, again, coming from, you know, the industry itself. You know, I mean, how do you all feel? Do you all feel do you feel like you're secure within your companies? Do you feel like your data is protected? That you're, you know, that what you do to guard your clients, your customers, do you feel protected? Yeah. But I mean, are you adequate? Because so my thinking is that from a business perspective, I mean, we build a business case. We're going from threat to risk. Okay, it went from theft to, you know, went from theft and then went to disruption. Now it's destruction. And so, you know, we made it a priority to say that we have to be proactive. We can't be reactive. Because if you're reactive, you're too late, right?
So one of the things that the government Department of Defense is moving to is a risk management framework, which is what you're basically talking about is what strategic risk is your bank willing to accept, and how much are you going to spend on it to get rid of the residual risk and things like that. So if you talk to somebody that's a certified information systems manager, the biggest part of their job is to present a business case to CEOs and presidents to say, this is your risk, this is what could happen to your business if there's a threat that actually takes advantage of that vulnerability, and here's my recommendation. But in the very end, it comes down to the senior leadership of a company of what they're willing to accept. It's not the CISO that's accepting the risk. It's the no-kidding leadership.
In my opinion, it's a no-brainer because, you know, in my business, again, It's reputational risk, one, but if it happens, you're toast. So regardless of what business you're in, if it's servicing, if it's providing products, et cetera, it doesn't matter. If you are compromised, you're toast. You're toast, because there's someone else going to take your business away from you, and you've got a black mark on yourself. So, I mean, and that's why we, again, I'm not in this promoting the bank, but no expense is enough for us. No expense.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick that, just finish up on your question earlier, is that we're not there as an industry. The firmware that sits in this laptop, it's manufactured where? China, right? This is talk back in the government back in the 90s that we were worried about that country and one other country, right, intelligence-wise, right? And it's come to fruition, right? So that's, and where was all the manufacturing being done in the firmware pieces? And until we fix that, right, we're not going to come to an answer, right? All the software we can load on there and everything else, that's going to help, and we got to watch it. That's the question, right? So yeah, absolutely. So that's one thing. The other piece with the risk management framework, right? Risk management frameworks have been around for a long time, and it's absolutely the way that you should manage security. Just like every day you do risk, you go to the doctors, they talk about your risk factors, right? It's the same thing in security. What's the impact? If this happened, what's the likelihood something's going to happen, right? That's catastrophic, and what's the impact to your business, right? One of the big areas, I'll bring it up to the panel and anyone in the audience as well, that I see out there today, and no one's talked about it really yet directly, is third-party connections to your organization, your supply chain.
Yeah.
That's huge, because I'm going to trust Doug, and Doug's going to trust me, right, explicitly, right? But if I have 10 people back here on my supply chain, and one of them goes bad, it comes through my VPN connections, right, all the way through to Doug's systems, that's not good. Doug looks bad, I look bad, and then it's a risk factor all the way through. So does anyone today, in the audience, are you guys even thinking about supply chain risk or third-party connection risk today? So yeah.
Well, I mean, I can say from a bank perspective that any vendor that we work with goes through the same scrutiny that we put ourselves through. Period. And
the supply chain thing is a big deal, and you obviously have to figure out how to tie those people down that you're going to allow to be a part of your machine-to-machine system, if that's what we're really talking about. But to go back to your basic question, it really comes down to authority, and the reason we have a lot of trouble with security is because we like to share authority. We like to pass it out. We like it to be convenient for everybody, right? So if you're all downloading, or your kids are downloading those flashlight apps, then those flashlight apps are probably passing your personal information around on those cell phones that everybody has. But we have the ability to build virtualized, centralized control systems that have software-defined networks that can have thousands of networks. You can lock down everybody into a separate little network for every workstation. If that device, which normally doesn't hook to the network, were to hook to the network, I could cause it to be a virtualized, authorized device on the network, but I wouldn't authorize it onto the network until I verified that it didn't have any malware in it. So it comes down to being a badass until to take away these conveniences so that you know the security is of higher priority than being convenient. And we are not there. Organizationally, nowhere are we there. We all want to be more convenient. That's an unfortunate deal.
One of the things to touch on Greg's point as well is supply chain management. We see it in, for instance, healthcare, where we have a one-way VPN in, so scripts go in, but nothing comes back, and that's one way that we can address that from a security standpoint.
Yes, sir.
I think we have to expand it beyond just the supply chain management, supply chain personnel. What's the weakest part of any system?
Question about what is the weakest part of any system?
People that are working the system, people that are utilizing the system, the people who are actually administrating the system. Those are the resources. That's where the resources have to be directed. You eliminate the weakest link. You eliminate people with comprehensive training. You identify who you are going to allow the most secretive access to your systems are, and you're going to eliminate a lot of problems. It's not just the supply chain, it's the people involved every step of the system.
Yeah, agreed. It's the person there that's in the warehouse that's loading the goods. It's the goods being loaded on the truck, because those are all now connected as well, logistically, and the person.
I can give you some very explicit examples.
No, that's good. Hey, so John, I don't know if you heard the question.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, why don't you expand on it?
Well, again, you've got a problem with the insider, that is people with authorized access, are about 75% of the problem from our vantage point. You've got third parties who can dial into industrial control systems. I keep harping on that, but industrial control systems are a big deal. They can dial in, they can change settings, they can change supply chain kinds of things, they can misappropriate materials if they can get access to those systems. And, you know, we have a lot of instances of, particularly in China, it keeps coming up, where manufactured ingredients are being stolen from the manufacturing process, and then they end up in warehouses, oftentimes blended in with counterfeit products, in counterfeit packaging, and no one really knows the difference. The last case that I've actually worked on that, Chinese police came in and arrested 5 full-time employees that had high-level access to the supply chain. So, yeah, it's a big deal.
If you think about the planet today, there are no flows of any kind that aren't controlled by information systems or industrial control systems. So we're talking water, money, food, energy, nothing. Everything is controlled by industrial control systems. So that's where the existential threat is. If we don't turn those things into secure systems, we're going to go down paths that are heretofore undiscovered. There are companies like Viasat that I work with out in San Diego that are putting PKI certs, encrypted certs on top of control systems so that they can control them, but they don't generally happen that way. Across all these pipelines, across everything around our industrial systems, we don't control them very well. And back to your point about people, people are the problem, always. When I mentioned the SWIFT network, the one break-in I know about the SWIFT network that happened in the past was a person pushing the wrong button inside the system. So when you go to Google and talk to them about their data centers, 2 people are authorized to be in that data center, and they have to have 2-person authorization to do anything, to touch anything in the data center. They don't let any other people in the data center. You know how many people are in DoD data centers? Thousands. We have thousands of people in our data centers because we don't want to hurt anybody's employment opportunities, so we make sure we don't let them go home.
Something else on the data center, something else on the utilization of personnel in the data center. Number 1, you should never have an even number of people in data centers. Number 2, you should never have the same people in the data centers on all shifts. Number 3, you always have an odd person in the data center, whether it be 3, 5, 7, or 9. That way, you're going to mitigate, not eliminate, you're going to potentially mitigate any, shall we say, conspiracy of people getting together and utilizing what they should.
Right, and real good points, real good points. Yes, sir.
So you secure your perimeter, you have the DLP, you have all the patch levels in place, you do whatever you need to do. After doing all that you still have potential of ransomware. So one of us, this organization across the street from us, Georgetown and the hospital also across from California. So what's one thing that, top 3 or one thing that stands out? If you've done all that you need to do, what else from your experience and exposure and security can we do? Maybe I can get some sleep about worrying about ransomware.
Right. So I'd like to repeat it. So you, on ransomware, you know, what are some things that you can do to go and help you get some sleep at night, so you don't have to worry about it as much, right?
I got one answer for him.
Yeah.
Hire Neovera, right?
There you go. I like that. All right.
The other point I would like to see is we've had some case studies, you know, that authorities have said pay the ransom in some cases, but the ones that I've heard of that have successfully come back from a ransomware attack without paying that is to do an offsite backup of your data. So essentially, you know, the problem is if it's connected to the network, your network drives can be corrupted as well. So essentially the answer I would recommend is take that data offsite.
true of all of us. Ransomware is not just for businesses. Unfortunately, it is, as you mentioned, becoming a criminal activity like hospitals, shutting down hospitals. But as long as you have a disconnected, not on the network copy of all your information all the time, you can always recover. But if you don't have that, if you connect everything up and you're synchronizing it to Dropbox and everything else, it can all be ransom. It can all be compromised.
Thank you. Next, ladies and gentlemen, the blue shirt, you were next, I think, and I'll get you, sir.
Going back about the ransomware thing, one of the things we have in place is the whole idea of whitelisting, and it was something that was mentioned by another gentleman, but I don't think there was a discussion on the role of using whitelisting and what are the well, I know there are pain points with whitelisting, but when it comes to what are the weaknesses with whitelisting from approach, and again, it's part of a layered approach.
Right, so whitelisting versus blacklisting. So whitelisting, listing, systems that are able to access other systems, or, sites that, people can go to in your organizations generally, right? Versus blacklisting was saying, hey, don't go to these sites because they're bad, right? I think there's a lot of pros and cons there. No, you've got to have a good. Yeah, it's application whitelisting only, right? So you've got to have a good system in place that can scale when you start talking about that, right? So see if the other gentleman want to jump in on that one.
What do you? The DoD is trying to exactly do that across the whole DoD with a big, very expensive system. I think it's, in general, a great idea. It causes inconvenience. It causes you not to be able to load a new application you thought you wanted to download, or something comes up as a crisis and they have to call the CEO because they needed to do something the system won't let them to do. So I think the trade-off of security versus inconvenience just has to be taken into account and applied, because any of those kinds of ideas are the ideas that make sense. And even the system I talked about earlier, where I said we could lock out malware at the CPU instruction level, that's really an exaggerated form of whitelisting, because you're saying these are the things authorized to do something in my network, everything else is not. So you're turning that on when you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add to his point as well, is you need to be concerned with the root systems, right? Because if you, for instance, have a Windows system, well, what firmware, the chipset itself is at risk. So when you talk about systems, whitelisting, that's only one tier of it, if you're talking about application level.
Yeah, John, any comments on application whitelisting? Thoughts, pros and cons?
Well, it gets down to management, and I think I look at the NIST 8 phases of information security lifecycle, of which only 2 of the phases involve computing. It's computing and communication. So the other 6 phases of information lifecycle have to do with workflows and management considerations, such as origination, classification, determinations, etc., and then on the tail end of that, obsolescence and removal. So in many places we go, you ask people who's in charge of information security, and they'll roll their eyes in their head. That's the first indicator of a problem. Then they say, well, the IT guys are. Well, that's not really true, because the IT guys, while they manage and flow the information, they're not the ones in charge. So oftentimes you have wide disparity on application of protection, of classification of important R&D data or patentable data, those kinds of things. They create work folders, and then they don't really control who has access to the work folders, or who is authorized access, or who can even grant access to folders. So the management process generally has to be elevated above IT. And that's kind of the gist of the new FERC and NERC guidelines as well. So I would just point out that a lot of these issues in blacklisting and whitelisting, et cetera, get back to management workflows. And generally you should, at a plant level or a facility level, you should have someone in charge of information security, like a single point, that then would report into a corporate headquarters single point. But oftentimes it's dispersed out so that no one really knows who's in charge, and everybody has different views of what's important, what's not important. It's very dicey out there, and a lot of the good government best practices, 853, and some of those are viewed as too complicated and too expensive to implement. So you know, again, management workflows are a big deal, and the determinations derived from that.
Great. Hey, thanks, John. Let's see. Oh, want to go next? I'm over. Yeah.
I just want to make a point about the seniors being in charge. I managed the year 2000 turnover for the DOD, and we spent $3 billion in the process. But one of the things that was happening was the Deputy Secretary of Defense was holding meetings because he was very concerned about it. And the people that were coming were low-level people from the IT shops. So finally I got him to understand that the real people responsible for Y2K were the commanders in the field that were responsible for continuity of military capability and operations the next day. So he sent out a letter to these guys and said, you're responsible, I'm holding you responsible, and I want you to sign a letter to tell me that you got Y2K fixed. Changed the game. 4-stars started coming to the meetings every day.
Yes, sir. Gentleman in the front.
Yeah, thank you, John, as well as explaining the full life cycle aspect of it. So many of the cybersecurity conferences that we discuss, there is no debate on the size and significance of it. And wonderful examples of this. Especially for Neovera as a company or growing company, how do you differentiate value to the customer? Because the size and significance of each without it, all the companies are not. Especially you had one of those slides where you have many partners of competitors. How do you differentiate your Neovera's value to the customer with 100 people's company versus your Packard or Cisco, Dell, those companies? Because all of them are the same.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's like...
And not only for the Neovera perspective, but also for many small growing companies in this space.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, you know, we run up against Dell SecureWorks. We run up against, you know, keep on going on, it's IBM, HP, because they all offer security management monitoring services as well. So a couple things. One is, you know, the value prop for us, right, to our clients is centered around multiple areas, right? So one is around, we've been an operational company for 15 years, so we're focused on, you know, the managed services pieces of it and the monitoring piece of it, right, for cybersecurity. So we know how to run all the infrastructure components, you know, the various operating systems, so heterogeneous environment, doesn't matter to us if it's Windows, Linux, et cetera, and we can secure all those as well. Same thing with databases, Oracle, SQL, don't really, it doesn't matter to us. We know how to run all those, we know how to secure all those, right? That's the expertise that we have in-house, and that's our expertise that we have through clients across multiple verticals as well. The other thing too is that, and what actually brings us up to the big boys also, right? So to the IBMs and the Dells, we're moving up that direction, right, I'll say, is that, you know, our operational facility is in a 24/7 by 365 manned security operations center that has all the physical security, all the workflows and processes to actually get into the building itself, where our security operations center actually sits. So it's not sitting in a normal office facility like an office building where, like I mentioned earlier, about people just physical security-wise, wave and try it. By the way, with the little motion sensors on the other side of glass doors that have a little gap in them, just stick a piece of paper in there, you'll be able to trigger the sensor almost all the time. And then walk in and go to a telephone closet that's protected by just a little key badge, right, where you can go right through the drywall right beside it, or you can actually rip off the lock off the door and get right to all the equipment. Because that's what a lot of folks that are, I'll say the smaller organizations like us, that's what they're doing. Right, they run their security operations center out of an office like that, and they have all their security servers, everything they do is sitting right there in the office. And so we've got the operational components for the infrastructure pieces. We've got a world-class facility that's, you know, N+2. So in other words, it's N+2 facility, 99, the 5 nines, and all the other ILDs, if you will. So 99.999% reliable, uptime all the time. So it's pretty, you know, all those different pieces, as well as the other piece from the Neovera side is that it's the white glove service that we provide to our clients. You know, so we are, you know, more consultative with our clients, and we're not cookie cutter with our clients like a lot of the big guys are.
I'll give you my perspective coming from the bank. Okay, so we do some work with Neovera and our trust group. But the way I look at it is this: it's, you know, as we do business with or even against competitors, for example, what differentiates us from other banks, from the JP Morgans to the cities of the B of A? Okay, so I'd say it's a niche, and, you know, the biggest companies don't mean they're the best, and so I'd say the Neovera, it's a niche for them. Number one. Number two is that, you know, as being a niche and something, a core competency of their company. That I'll give you an example. When we were competing against General Electric. GE, Capital had a big, they're a big financial institution, right? So I posed so we were in a deal, and I was talking to the prospect, and I said, let me ask you a question. Would you buy would you rather buy a bank card or a payment product from GE or a refrigerator? And so the bottom line is, I'm not going to buy, a bank product from a company who does so diverse that it's not a core competency. And so, again, I'm here because I believe in these two companies, and Neovera especially. I mean, I've watched them, I've seen them grow, and the reputation, I think, would speak for itself. Again, it's not an advertisement for them. I'm just saying the reputation. Check with their clients. Check with I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what we do. When we survey our clients, why do you like U.S. Bank better than J.P. Morgan, Citi, et cetera, et cetera? It's those things that actually differentiate yourself that are really kind of niche to your market. So, I thought I'd add that.
I would add on to that as well. WatchGuard, we've been in business 20 years, right? So, based out of Seattle, and securities are sole niche. So it's a great story and great illustration, because when you look at some of our competitors, they're making toasters, they're making switches. We simply make network security appliances. And we realize that, and we're the best at what we do.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Maybe the last question, I don't know. I'm talking to a couple of CEOs. They told me, in the Middle Ages, medicine used to kill as many people, if not more, than the people that didn't get medicine. And a lot of people have said, well, it's sometimes cheaper from a business perspective to just pay a fine and, and sort of pay out the dues for getting hacked than it is for buying all these things to protect you, 10,000 things to protect you, only to not have you protect you anyway, with no guarantees on anything. How would you respond to that, the sort of the rising cost of cyber protection that is sort of rivals the cost of getting hacked?
I'd say from a business perspective, it's a cost of doing business. You just have to absorb it. Because, again, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, what your business is about. If you get hacked, you're toast. You have no customers. You can have any confidence in your customers. Not going to have any confidence in you.
But the evidence shows the opposite, because look how many companies have been hacked in the last 2 years, and they're still in business.
But like Target, for example. I think used Target, and you had another
Home Depot,
But look what it cost them: billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. So would you rather spend, my understanding, the average hack's going to cost you about $3.5 million. Doesn't matter what size you are. But if you're big, it's going to be scaled. But it costs Target reputational risk, number one. If you watch a stock drop like a tank, but like a lead balloon, number one. Number two is that, we actually issued those cards because the system actually was hacked. The Target system was hacked. So there was a consequence to us because we issued their co-brand cards. They're a Minneapolis-based company. So that cost us millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. And so, again, what's it worth to you? What's it worth to your business? If you think you can absorb it, you can absorb the reputational risk, then I'd say, don't make it a priority.
Just to add a point to that, we've all enjoyed a wonderful sort of Goldilocks period of time where when we lose our credit card, the bank pays us and covers our bill, right? You're just talking about small businesses that do the same thing. So even Target, when they got hacked, if the bank didn't fix those credit cards, the bank paid for them. Now, with these new ideas about putting chip cards out and passing the risk over to the businesses or passing them to us personally, which is where we'll probably end up going, people will take this a lot more seriously, including the businesses, right? But when you're trying to figure out what the value proposition as a small business or any business to how you want to protect yourself, it has to come down to how do you want to protect your customers, how do you want to protect your IP, how do you want to protect yourself and your employees, because every one of them are at risk. That's the issue we got going on.
And I would say as well, we've had cases in the Northwest where grocery store chains And I would say that we haven't really touched on that as well, but PCI's done a great job of saying you're not going to process credit cards. So now you have organizations concerned about their security. We've had, you talk about being hacked or data breach. That's hopefully if your brand could sustain it. Certainly there's data that says some brands haven't been able to sustain those attacks. And you know, this grocery store chain, they weren't allowed to process credit cards between Thanksgiving and the first of the year. You talk about all of that revenue that they lost out simply by doing a cash-only business, as well as that, you know, now we're trying to rebuild the brand, or they're trying to rebuild the brand and to get people to trust them again. So it's certainly, you know, and you look at personal identifiable information, they don't quite have the stronghold that PCI does with retail. So that's also a concern when we talk about the security of data is how can we get those organizations to start caring the same as we have PCI have that stronghold.
John, any thoughts from your side as well?
Well, I worked a project with a bank where they're trying to eliminate bank branches. So in the future, their projection is they would have driverless bank branches where you call the bank, one of their vehicles shows up in your driveway, you walk out and you do all of your transactions, including ATM and everything else, in an oversized van. And I don't think our team ever settled on all the vulnerabilities associated with that kind of thinking. You know, could somebody shake you down for your two-factor authentication right outside the van and then go in and move money around in your accounts? I don't know. There were a lot of issues that are still in progress, but
must be Bank of America.
Anyway, there's a lot going on out there. It's tough to monitor all of it.
So it's tough. I mean, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce talks about, and you guys can go to their website and see it. I know, and we usually have a few slides on this as well. But the majority of smaller businesses that have a breach like that actually go out of business because they can't sustain like some of the larger guys can financially, right? Now, so they'll be gone from business, right? The smaller organizations, you know, a few $100 million and below, that's a pretty big hit. That is, if you're a public trading company, that is something that's on your annual report, you know, as well, because that's material. You know, it's material to a business executive, right, and for finance. And I think, you know, to Doug's point earlier, the reputational impact to the large organizations is huge. And the reputational risk, it goes all the way back to the OCC, Office of Comptroller of Currency, talking about reputational risk years ago to the financial organizations. Your credit union, you've got the same exact things. A smaller credit union, it's the same stuff. Any closing thoughts from the panelists? Any thoughts that you guys have?
Well, I'd like to bring up the notion, it's already been talked about, but about risk management frameworks. I do not see a lot of that out there in companies. I do see audits by Price Waterhouse and people like that, but they tend to be checklist oriented. A friend of mine, PhD risk assessment expert, says a checklist is a surefire way to learn more and more about less and less. So you can walk in with blinders with a checklist. You don't see what's going on outside of the checklist framework. And the risk management framework, like the NIST 837 and 39 guidelines, is a way to look at the whole security issue from a much wider perspective. And you know, there's some good tools out there, and I don't see a lot of those being used. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, thanks, John.
Let me just second John's thoughts about checklists. One of the things that's happened in the Department of Defense is they have become very process checklist oriented. And one of the problems with that situation is it allows us to apply less and less knowledgeable people to the checklisting process, which means they don't generally know what they're doing. So we end up spending a lot of resources, a lot of time and energy for very little security. And that's one of the things that's got to change. But as a last thought, let me just leave this with everybody. You know, if you're going to take issue with the United States as a nation and try to attack us, it's not necessarily to your best interest to go fight us with missiles or ships or tanks or all of the normal weapons of war, because cyber is such a good and valuable domain and easy way to get in. It's not been mentioned in the forum today, but Iran is one of the highest level hacking organizations on the planet right now, and obviously they don't really like us that much. So one of the 4-star retired admirals, Admiral Jim Stavridis, has been saying since before he left the service and ever since in several of his books, it's time for the nation to step up and create the equivalent of a cyber force like we created the Air Force after World War II. That's the nature and the extreme seriousness of the issues we're talking about. But as was just said, it goes all the way down to you and I's personal lives. It goes down to small businesses. It permeates everybody. It's just in front of everybody. So we have to address it at all levels.
Because isn't it the government right now? I thought it was NSA, and FBI cover domestic, and then DoD covers international.
It's really NSA. It's really DoD and DHS.
DHS. I'm sorry. Yes, DHS.
But then you have specific agencies to do specific things.
Yeah.
Closing thoughts, John? John?
Well, I think, it comes down to user awareness. I'm going to bring it back to user level, because ultimately that's where it starts at the beginning of the day. With these machines that we use, obviously, if we can train and work with one step that is tangible or that's affordable for us, and that's user awareness. I have some great training decks if you want to leverage those inside your organization on raising the awareness. But absolutely, I think that some great points were brought up here today, and we need that same mentality, as I mentioned in my earlier presentation, of ripping up the carbon copies. That same tenacity in our own day and age today, where we're not raising children that Facebook friend or hand out their personal information to just anyone. So thank you for letting me be here.
No problem. Thank you for being here. Doug?
I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to sit up here on the panel, and hopefully I was able to provide you with some thought-provoking ideas, and hopefully you'll act on something that will protect your businesses.
And thanks everyone for coming. I can tell you that, again, one thing to remember today, and, John, we already went, but John, you already went with your closing thought. Any more thoughts real quick?
We run across the problem a lot of what we call gold nuggets and gold dust, where companies do try to protect the gold nuggets, they've got gold dust laying all over the place that anybody could figure out what they're doing. And that has a lot of implications in IT systems and also in proprietary information, intellectual property, and everything else. So that's my last 2 cents.
Great, thanks, John. Again, close the thought for myself is a couple things. One is that if you guys don't walk away from here with anything else, right, is that just remember all the talk about weapons of mass destruction is back in the day, right? WMDs, right? Those are APTs, or advanced persistent threats, that you guys see on the news, on Channel 4, 7, 9, 5, whatever you guys watch, CNN, etc. Right? Those are what the people are talking about: ransomware, malware, all the buzzwords, right? People are stockpiling those on both sides, right? Nation states are stockpiling those, and it's not going to stop. It's going to continue, and we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. This thing about encrypting files and deleting files is, again, just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more advanced stuff that's coming out that's stronger. So the big thing there is, layers of defense, and watch what's going on, just like a casino does. Watch everything. And thank you again for coming today, guys. Thank you very much.